Hi, this is Arthur Malman. I'm your host on the next segment of the electrical sustainability out in the east end of Long Island. And we have again as our guest for a second segment, John O'Connell from PSEG Long Island.
Yes.
And why don't you give me your exact title?
Arthur, it's John O'Connell. I'm the Vice President of Transmission and Distribution at PSEG Long Island, and it's great to be here with you again.
Okay, well, it's terrific to have you because there were so many misconceptions about what is happening that it's great to get some facts that we can all agree upon or understand, and most of us aren't engineers, so we don't understand them to begin with. If the folks who put the little map up of Long Island again, I just want to touch quickly on what we talked about in the first segment for those who weren't with us. The red dots are power generation stations on Long Island, and they're not owned by the company, they're owned by other people, so the company is pretty much agnostic as to who they buy from. And the green triangles are major cables to bring in electrical energy from out of the area. In the middle, we see a red line, and that's a heavy-duty voltage line that brings power in through Western Suffolk. And then as the population decreases, as you get out toward the North and South Fork, the blue line takes over. And then when you get out to about Wainscott, it becomes a yellow line, 23 or something volts.
23,000 volts, yep.
Yeah, 1,000 volts. I won't put my finger on that.
Don't, no.
But in any event, the program that we've all heard about is to basically extend that red line a little further out, extend the blue line a little further out,
yes,
and increase the power in the
brown line.
The brown line,
yes,
going from 23 to about 30 to service the population.
Yes.
And I think very important, because of a big misconception out here, is that's something that's a plan for over about a 10-year period, and if the forecast is wrong, yeah, you're going to adjust your plan and your construction to meet the forecast, because you don't want to build power lines you don't need.
That's right.
So now let's talk about the demand out here on the East End. And as I said, there's a lot of differences of opinion out here as to how much our demand is going to be 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 10 years from now. But I think what was an important takeaway from our first segment was that this plan to build these big additions to our energy capability, carrying capability out here, is itself flexible and, yes, will be adjusted as the planning goes forward, as the construction goes forward to meet, yes, the demand. If the demand is in fact lower, as some people think it should be, there'll be less time and money spent on transmission lines. But what are some of the ways in which the demand could decrease rather than increase, John?
That's a good question. Again, our forecast is forced to contemplate things that might happen, mm-hmm, growth that might happen, use increase that might happen, right? And we need to forecast a long way out into the future, because some of these infrastructure upgrades take some time to design and permit and build. So we have to look pretty far out. But in that window, a lot of things could change. Growth could slow, or use could slow, right? And we do really actively try, as we spoke in the other segment, to manage load such that we don't have to construct these lines. These lines shouldn't be constructed if they don't need to be constructed. And if we can have people manage their peak and use less energy, that's a far more efficient way to serve load than to build transmission lines. So the company really supports a number of different programs to educate customers on how to use energy, provide energy efficient lighting, and there's a number of different programs, we spoke a little bit before, to incent businesses and residents to use less power at peak, to bring the peak down so that we have to construct and expand less.
Well, in the prior segment, we started touching upon this a little bit. I guess it's called like a peak savers program or something. I forgot the exact term, but it's a program you have to help us take the high use items and cut back on their electrical usage. Changing light bulbs is a first step, and then also you have a program I know to control within reason. My air conditioner at peak
Yes.
load time,
Yes.
I think you take it down 4 degrees or something like that,
Yep, yep.
if you want. And then, of course, many of us out here have pool pumps that go blasting away all the time. And there was something called a variable something or other pool pump,
Yep.
variable speed pool pump that some of the local pool guys are not too fond of. Some of them are. But you also mentioned that you'd have a program where you can control my pool pump.
Yes, it's really very similar to the air conditioning controller. A pool pump's a big motor. It draws a fair amount of power to pump that water, and we make an attachment to it, and it works on a radio signal or your local internet. And if the demand is there and we'd like to bring it down a little bit, you agree that under our control, the pool pump will shut off for a couple hours a day and just not run. And it's really the same concept as the air conditioner compressor, that if the customer can live without that electrical use for a couple hours on a hot day, it really will help the grid. Not for any one individual customer,
Sure.
but when hundreds or thousands of people subscribe to such a service, it really can make a big difference.
Well, now let's talk a little bit about the East End. And if you folks can put up the visual we have, okay, that's great. In the lower left-hand corner, you probably have the most well-known substation on the East End, because it's the point of controversy or discussion, at least, of the wind farm coming into Wainscott and then running a cable through Wainscott up to the Buell Lane substation,
Yep.
or potentially come in through someplace along Hither Hill State Park and then run down the length of the railroad or 27 into Buell Lane. And I don't want to get into the pros and cons here today about the wind farm, because I think you said in our prior program that the power company is basically agnostic. You're happy to use wind, you're happy to use solar. You'll use whatever it takes to get the power to the East End that the East End needs. But if you could you could put that Buell Lane. Buell Lane is not really one substation; it's really 3, I guess you said.
Yes.
And the next one is Amagansett, and then there are a couple further out.
Yes.
Now, can we go? We don't need the video now, but let's just talk about what's at Buell Lane. It's a bunch of what?
Yeah. So at the substations down near Buell Lane, the East Hampton substation, and our substation we call Buell Lane, we have transmission lines that come in.
Right.
There's 69,000 volt lines and 23,000 volt lines come into those substations. And then we have transformers that take that voltage down to a distribution voltage, 4,000 volts and 13,000 volts that go out into the streets like we saw in the video,
Sure.
and then work their way down the community streets to go through other transformers to serve the homes.
Now, what's the capacity of Buell Lane?
A Buell Lane typically would be able to supply about 30 megawatts of power.
And the the nominal discussion of the power coming from the wind farm is, I think, theoretically 90, but I gather it's actually less.
A little bit less. It's in that range, and typically you hear about a nameplate rating, and then you hear about an actual rating.
Yeah.
The nameplate rating is just what the machines can put out themselves at full power. But then there's always a little bit of auxiliary power that it takes, lighting and coolant pumps and losses on the cable before it gets to our substation. So if a nameplate is 95, maybe the actual by the time we get it is 92, 3 megawatts, a couple percent of auxiliary losses.
Okay, because we've heard all different kinds of numbers for auxiliary losses, down to 70. That may be part of the loss from the ocean through the cable all the way into Buell Lane. But how much power can Buell Lane absorb?
Well, so the Buell Lane, as it stands, without any upgrades, can take the 95 megawatts that we expect to get from the actual capability of this wind farm. And that station and the transmission system around it can take that 95 megawatts coming off those windmills.
Now, if the wind farm were built and 90 megawatts or however many come into Buell Lane,
Yep.
and then next week, obviously not next week, but next week,
Yep.
the town figures out a way to generate 70 megawatts of solar.
Yep.
What happens to it? Buell Lane is now full.
Buell Lane is full, and the town would go through a process to look at other possible hookup points in the area. And Buell Lane would not be an option at that point without an upgrade. All right, so it happens this way very often that injection points, people that want to come in and inject into the system, there's a process. It's somewhat of a first in, first out. And if someone has if we have a need, and if a developer has a solution, it goes through a process. We lock in on a proposal, and then someone that comes along after that has possibly an upgrade that would be needed, or possibly another location that might not need an upgrade in order to inject and hook up to the system.
Well, in our situation, I can't imagine that if the wind farm goes forward, there's actually going to be electricity coming into Buell Lane for 2 or 3 years. If next week the town comes to you and says, we found a solution, in a week we're going to produce 20 megawatts or whatever it is, they could then plug in, or have has PSEG, Long Island, committed to the wind farm to take their power?
Yeah, at this point we have.
Oh, okay.
There is a
So
commitment.
you've reserved that spot
That
for them.
spot is reserved, and obviously there's a process where if things are going to change and that injection, that hookup is not going to happen,
Sure.
there's notice that has to be given to free up that space. They call it a queue. It's a generation queue.
Okay, so they basically they've reserved a spot on the queue.
They have.
Is what's
Yes.
really happened here.
Yes.
Now, it took us 15 seconds to say upgrade Buell Lane to accept more power.
Yes.
What does that really entail?
Okay.
What are we talking about there?
Good question. So, in order to upgrade the system, and there's really a couple different types of upgrades, right? I talked about these transformers in the station, and those transformers can supply 30 megawatts, right? So sometimes if the community is using more than 30 megawatts, their load goes up, fed from that substation. We need to upgrade the transformers, right? So we could put in a bigger transformer, say good for 40 megawatts. Typically the stations have 2 transformers. We could put in a third transformer to serve community load. And that's what an upgrade would look like if the distribution community load was increasing, right?
Now,
More transformer capacity.
How long, let's say I tell you today, and you agree, you're going to
Yep.
upgrade that. About how long does that take? Does that take a week, or does it take a year or two?
It takes longer than a week.
Takes
and
longer than a week.
It's a couple years. And what we need to do is we need to design the change, design maybe a third transformer can fit on that piece of property. If it doesn't, then we need more property. And then you have to go a property search. Then we have to work with the community to do outreach and understand impacts. So it's a couple of years for the process.
Well, let me ask you this. We said the wind farm has effectively reserved in the queue
Yes.
X number of megawatts
Yes.
to be delivered probably no sooner than 2 or 3 years from now.
Yes.
And let's say tomorrow the town of East Hampton says, we've got 30 megawatts that we could inject into the system.
Yep.
Could you accept, and it's not going to happen tomorrow, but could you accept it tomorrow knowing that by 2 or 3 years from now, when the wind farm is going to be injecting its load into the system, you will have already expanded Buell Lane? Now, this is obviously a loaded question because there's obviously a citizens group that doesn't want you to do it.
Right.
There's a citizens group that does want you to do it.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of different
but
perspectives.
obviously it makes it harder. But is that the way it would work if the world were perfect?
If we had upgrades that were planned in the area, and say the wind hookup was going to come in 2022, and we knew that we were going to upgrade for 2023 and there'd be additional capacity, and someone else, the town or someone else, was looking to fulfill a need in the 2023 timeframe, then we could work them in and we could give them that spot in that queue.
Okay. Now, one of the other things we've talked about in the town is batteries.
Yes.
And storing power out here for the peak loads during using batteries.
Yeah.
You know, again, how big is this thing? Is it?
They're not the batteries you put in a little flashlight.
No, they're
right?
not the flashlight. I can't get a lot of the
right.
C cells and stack them together.
No, they're not going to work. Utility scale batteries get very big, and you know you get. We have turned on recently 2 batteries out on the East End, and they're 2 of the larger utility scale batteries deployed in the nation. We're really proud of that, and they're 5 megawatt batteries, right? Each one is 5 megawatts. And they're you know, tractor trailer size units that have to be staged on a piece of property to give the proper amount of space for storing the batteries and cooling and all the auxiliary equipment. So it's a big piece of equipment.
So it's a big thing, like you said, tractor trailer
It's
size.
like a tractor trailer. It's similar
To a
the
container,
size
shipping
of
container?
of a shipping container. It's similar to the size of one of our substations.
Okay. Now, let's say you put, and I'm not saying this is where you put it, let's say you put next to Buell Lane one of these shipping containers, batteries.
Right.
And the up island power goes out to Buell Lane.
Yep.
How long can that shipping container battery run the town of East Hampton?
Typically, the batteries that we have at 5 megawatts can provide power for about 8 hours.
Okay.
Okay. Or they could provide 2.5 megawatts for 16 hours, right?
Oh, I see. You'd cut the power down.
Cut the power down if you don't need quite as much, and the battery lasts a little bit longer. Okay. So typically, the batteries work that way. If you use their full capability, maybe they'll last for 8 hours. If you use half their capability, they'll last for 16 hours. And typically, what the concept with the batteries is that, again, we plan our power system for these outages or contingencies, right? And normally, if you have a station and 2 transformers are there, you can lose one transformer, the load goes to the other, and that's what we plan for, so the lights stay on. And you need a battery if there's 2 30 MVA transformers, but you have 40 MVA on the station. Then when you lose one, you're going to need 10 MVA to help you. And if you had a battery nearby that could be turned on and supply that delta of power, that's how we would use the battery.
Now, this tractor trailer kind of size battery, what does that cost? Does it cost $20,000, or is it cost?
It's not thousands. It's tens of millions, right?
Tens of millions. Okay.
Yeah, the batteries.
Okay, so you're talking about big time expenditures here.
Big expenditures. They're the technology's moving along.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And you know, you hear about the Teslas and the battery powered cars, but utility scale batteries are still on the high end of the cost curve to serve load. So
this tractor trailer size battery that we're talking about is probably a couple $1 million?
Easily, yes.
Oh,
yes.
So 4 or 5 is probably...
Yes.
Oh, okay, so this is not 59 cents.
No, it's not. It's not.
You can't get them at Costco?
No, they're not selling at Costco.
They're not selling at
someday.
Costco? Okay. So
they're a very specialized piece of equipment. There's a fair amount of maintenance. And again, at some point, we think the costs are going to be coming down. The technology is moving. But they're a high-cost solution at this point.
In the ideal world out in East Hampton, anything that comes here has no deleterious effect on anything.
Right.
And you said that these batteries are, let's call it the shipping container.
Yeah.
A shipping container with a battery inside. And yet you said there's maintenance. What if it leaks? What happens to the ground underneath it?
All those things are contemplated and designed Anything that you build can leak, right? But there's really,
Containment.
Containment and maintenance and sensors and all that. And there really are really no concerns from our company or many other companies with those types of maintenance issues.
Okay.
Everything needs a little attention, everything needs a little maintenance, but you put it on a maintenance schedule, you do inspections, and the risk is...
So this is sort of like an above-ground fuel storage facility, even not quite as dangerous.
I'd say so.
But you could build a big concrete dike around the thing, and if the worst comes to happen.
Containment is not a major issue. The batteries are not like the old batteries, like your car batteries that have a lot of fluid in them.
Right.
And any safety mechanisms are very, very sure and simple. Yeah.
How long does this battery? How long does this thing last?
Well, the batteries, have a utility grade life, and typically what we're seeing is you'll have a battery that'll be in service for up to 20 years.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So it sounds like, at least at this point in the cost curve,
Yep.
that is a way to handle peak load, but a very expensive way.
Yes.
And it sounds like it's almost not really handling reasonably anticipated peak load, but really almost like my backyard generator. It's an emergency backup battery.
That's the concept of use right now, yes.
Okay, because I think a lot of us out here have said, gee, we'll take 5 or 10 acres, we'll put in 20 or 30 of these shipping containers, and boy, we're off to the races. Yeah. But that's like $100 million.
It adds up pretty quick. And it's something that we're keeping an eye on, and we think there's a lot of promise. There's a lot of programs coming down the pike about incenting us and requiring certain amounts of battery storage over the years, which we're really excited about because we think that'll stimulate the industry, get a lot of experience with the devices, and start to step up the manufacturing and bring the costs down.
I saw some article, I guess, in the newspaper in the last 2 or 3 days where there was some Chinese company that's developed a new type of battery technology, and rather than $20,000 for whatever the size battery was, it was now going to be $2,000. So it's obviously a technology that's really changing dramatically.
Yes.
But I still think you're not really suggesting that batteries are really going to be, at least in the next 5 years, a long-term solution to handle our peak needs here.
I don't see that in 5 years. Right?
Now, do these batteries wear out faster if you use them to power the peak?
Yeah, there's a balance. If you never use it, the battery can age and deteriorate. But if you use it a lot, it also loses some of its life. So you have to strike that balance.
Okay, so the idea of using it every day from 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the summer to 8 o'clock at night.
It's going to age.
It's going to age very quickly.
Yeah. And again, similarly, if you never discharge it, if you only leave it sitting there charged, it will not perform as well. So you have to strike that balance.
This is a bit more complicated than everybody in the public discourse tries to make this.
It's pretty complicated. Yeah, powering up a community is complicated.
No, again, it's great to have you here because there are so many people with so many facts that turn out to be figments of their imagination. And it's much harder to make some of this stuff work in practice than it is when you have a one-sentence soundbite.
I would agree with you, Arthur. Yeah.
From what we've said today, it sounded to me that the most effective way for us short-term out here on Long Island on the East End to combat this problem is really to conserve.
Conserve, there's no doubt about it. The cheapest megawatt is the megawatt you don't use.
Yeah. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with this, but there's been some controversy out here because at one point, people who put in solar panels had a meter that went both ways.
Yes.
And am I right in saying that if I put in a solar panel array in my house today, I would obviously save a lot of money in the summer. But if I'm trying to sell my power back to the power company under the new rule, I don't get as much per megawatt, whatever it is, watt that I sell back. And I guess that's because when I don't need the power, probably nobody else needs the power.
That's part of it, yeah, that's part of it. Some of the rules on solar and metering have changed a little bit, and it's always being looked at. There's a couple goals with the way the utilities are looking at billing and metering, but it's about making sure that the billing is fair, right? We don't want to see customers that can't afford solar on their homes subsidizing those that can, right? And what we're also trying to do, to some of your earlier points, is some parts of our system could really use some extra support and generation to help us defer construction and expansion. And in those cases, we really want to incent more use and pay a little bit more. Because if homeowners building rooftop solar in a given area can help us defer expensive transmission lines, then that's best for all the ratepayers, and we want to pay a little more for that use. So we're trying to balance all those things with those methods.
John,
of billing.
this was really both these shows very helpful to
I
me.
I really enjoyed talking with you.
Because again, it's people try to make this stuff sound simple, but it's really not.
It's a little complicated. We're a great utility, a great company, and we really want to do the right thing for the customers. But it's not easy. We're trying.
Again, thank you so much. Seriously.
All right, pleasure talking with you.
This was really terrific.
Thank you.